So as the 20s rolled on into the 30s, Dada never really went away. It more transformed into something that came to be called Surrealism. So Surrealism was a movement that comes around in the 1930s, and let's talk about what this term really means. It's not specifically a visual style. What we mean by Surrealism is a movement that's united by its interest in psychoanalysis. So, surrealism is a diverse movement and it encompasses a lot of different visual styles. It also encompasses literature and performance, theater, and kinds of expression that are difficult to categorize. So, a lot of things kind of fall under this surrealist umbrella. What unites them is an idea that what we are as human beings is an unconscious that is big and strange and dark with a very thin layer of consciousness on top of it. So they're united by an interest in the writings of Sigmund Freud. In photography, where surrealism has to do with photography, they're interested in the way that photography is capable of delivering something they call the optical unconscious. What we mean by that is what we intuitively sense but cannot consciously grasp in a direct way. So you're probably familiar, just again through popular culture, through with the basic ideas of Freud's model of the personality and psychology. This whole way of thinking of what a person is and how our minds work was very new and a radical challenge to what people thought a person was and how a person worked in their time. But not to get too deep into psychoanalysis, but what matters most to artists at this time is this idea that our conscious mind is just a very small part of what we are as a person, and that we are motivated by this vast undersea level of the unconscious, where drives and memories and urges that are very difficult for us to grapple with are what really motivate our actions and our thoughts. When it comes to visual art, you may be familiar with Salvador Dali as a surrealist artist. He is a great example of an artist who's interested in trying to visualize the dream world. So, in psychoanalysis, our dreams are a way that our unconscious tries to bring to consciousness these urges and desires and conflicts and so forth. And the consciousness can't grasp them directly, but through trying to make them visual through art, that's a way of trying to get a little bit closer to what the unconscious is trying to tell us. The art of Renee Magritte is also kind of useful if you're thinking about how the surrealists are thinking about the visual world. Look at the painting that says, "This is not a pipe." It's obviously a picture of a pipe, but it's not a pipe. In surrealism, the thing that you see in a picture is not the thing in the world. It's sort of, we treat the thing in a picture a little bit like the way we treat the thing if we're analyzing a dream. We're trying to figure out why it's there, what it means, what it makes us feel. And by sort of processing that, we may go through something like getting a little closer to understanding the unconscious, which can't be approached directly. So this is Andre Kertesa's Satiric Dancer, and you can see what he's done here is pose the dancer in a way that treats her body kind of like a sculpture or like a doll. Her arms are posed at these wild angles. She's wearing this dress that's super modern and super sculptural. She's posed to sort of juxtapose her with a sort of truncated human form in the form of a sculpture, and then another truncated human form up on the wall, and he's angled the camera so that the whole thing is sort of framed almost like she's in a dollhouse. The space is really distorted in a strange way. So with surrealism, you get a lot of this feeling of being dehumanized and made strange, and at the same time, kind of sexualizing it in a strange and really appealing way. So this sense of attraction and repulsion, the degradation and dehumanizing and sexualizing all blended together. That's that's what's making Hans Bellmer's stuff work. So he was best known for this lengthy series of photographs that he made that featured a sort of a doll that he made with pieces of mannequins and pieces of other things and machinery that he would pose in different ways and then photograph. The sense of sort of a visceral reaction to an object that's put together in a particular way. A lot of surrealists were interested in that, and that's what Man Ray is up to with this with the photograph that you see here. It's a photograph of a sculpture, and he made the sculpture as well. So it's an iron, the same kind of flat iron that people would have heated up on their stove and then ironed their clothes with. But he's put it together with these tacks in such a way that it really makes you sort of sense, like sort of intuitively recoil from the smoothness and the sharpness and the implicit violence all put together in this small object. So Man Ray was a photographer, artist who was very well connected in his world. The world of surrealism really revolves around Paris. While it is an international movement, the key figures in surrealism are based in Paris, and Man Ray is one of them. So this is a photograph that he made of a work in progress by Marcel Duchamp, that Dada artist that we were looking at just a little bit ago. This piece would later, this is just like a little small area of a piece that would later become Duchamp's masterpiece, The Large Glass, which you can see at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. But this photograph is made through a long exposure that the final image looks strangely like it could be an aerial photograph of a landscape that might have at the time reminded people of photography that came from World War I. But it's a mysterious and strange and highly abstract artwork that's built on the work of another artist of his time. Man Ray was an innovator. He did original things with the photographic medium. Now, people had made these kinds of photograms before. He wasn't the first, but he definitely pushed it further than other artists had. He called these rayograms or rayographs. They're technically photograms, and they're done by means of putting photographic paper down in a darkroom and casting shadows on top of them. So you can see he used multiple steps and layers of shadows, including a sort of performative element in the one that you see on the right. Another thing that Man Ray did with some of his photographs was what they call solarization. And what they're doing in this process is exploiting one of the tricks. It's sort of a hack of the medium. It's not what photographic printing paper is meant to do, but it so happens that if during the exposing of a negative onto photographic paper, if you just flashlight onto it very briefly, you can get these sort of strange reversal effects in the dark tones of the photographs. So he put that to work, and he made it a part of a whole visual style and strategy that's strange and alienating, and has that eerie, dreamlike effect that the surrealists so loved. So a couple of things about these photographs. Man Ray made a lot of photographs of nude women, a lot of figure studies, a lot of them sort of separating off different bodily parts, sort of cropping them in different ways. And the models who he worked with were also his assistants. So there was a thin line between people who assisted him in the studio and people who sat for him for the camera. Though several of his models came to be well known as artists in their own right, including the model who you see on the right, who is Lee Miller. And this one, in Angst Violin, the model is Kiki de Montparnasse, and she was very well known to her generation as a sort of a muse because of her strong influence on Man Ray's ideas and thinking about art. Though she didn't make art on her own, her way of making art was to influence Man Ray's art. So she's well known in that respect. So these are photographs by two of Man Ray's collaborators. You know, they call them assistants or models, but he worked with them while he was working in Paris. So Bernice Abbott, we've seen her photography a little bit earlier, and she continues after her time working with Man Ray. She comes back to New York and produces Changing New York, and the photograph you see on the left is from that series. On the right, you see a photograph by Lee Miller called Portrait of Space. So she started out as a photographer and model working with Man Ray, went off on her own to do photography and became a very significant photographer, particularly during World War II. So we'll see more of her work a little further down the road. But here she's working as a surrealist, sort of giving us this sort of sense of windows onto the world and sort of a sense of interiority versus exteriority. So gender roles were definitely being challenged at this time in Europe in the 1920s and 30s. And one of the artists who challenged them more than most was Claude Cahoon, who was not particularly well known as an artist in their time, but came to be better known in decades that followed. So Claude Cahoon performed these sort of roles for the camera, did these sort of theatrical characters for the camera, was definitely a gender transgressing person in their lived life, and during the German occupation of France was very active in resistance activities, ended up being imprisoned for resistance activities, and that was disastrous for their life. Although they did survive another 10 years after the war. But these are Claude Cahoon and an artist who has definitely come to influence people more in the decades after than during the time that the art was made.